So we're here today with Dr. Christopher Marshall at the Texas A&M University at Galveston, Department of Marine Biology. And Chris is a longtime member of the manatee community and points onward from there. So we're going to find out what he's been up to in his career today. Chris, I wonder if you could start by giving us a little background about how you got started and worked with manatees.
Well, I've always been interested in animals, and as a kid, like most kids, I went through my insect phase, and I went through my dinosaur phase. And through my explorations and curiosity as a kid, I decided that I wanted to be a veterinarian. So my start actually was on a very different pathway. And I did what most people do when they're interested in pursuing veterinary medicine. I went and worked with veterinarians for a while. In high school, and then went to college with the intent of really, going to vet school. So I started in animal science and discovered quickly that although I liked animals, I didn't really care for the rest of the coursework. And so I quickly switched into biology, and that's when I found out about research and graduate programs and things like that. And about halfway through my undergrad curriculum, I made a pretty big switch and decided I wanted to pursue graduate school and research. So after I got my degree from Virginia Tech and bachelor's, I of course moved to Florida, and that's when I first saw my first Florida manatee. And I had never heard of manatees, even though I was familiar with most marine mammals. And so I got really curious about them and started reading up on them. And what I discovered was that we really didn't know that much. And one of the things I really wanted to do in my career is really, contribute to the field and to natural history of animals and conservation of animals. And so I decided, well, this might be a good thesis topic. And so I started looking around in the state of Florida to see who was doing what and look for opportunities. And that really landed me eventually in Gainesville, Florida at the Cyrenian Project, where I was meeting Tom O'Shea. And, finding opportunities and for thesis work in grad school is kind of serendipitous. You have to find the right person with the right project at the right time with funding, and I was having trouble finding that until, as you know, Tom O'Shea directed me to this interesting scientist at the vet school named Roger Reed. He was doing some neuroanatomy, and so that's how you and I met, and I became very interested in the work that you were doing with brains and sensory systems, and there was still a lot of work to be done. And so that's how I really got into the manatee work.
Okay. Well, that's been 20 years or so from the point we're at right now. So maybe you can give us a kind of a brief sort of idea of how manatees led you to other things, and what your current, scientific research life as a faculty member is like on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. I guess for me, I've always been interested in how animals work. It's almost, I look at it from an engineering perspective. I'm not an engineer, but I really enjoy looking at the underlying mechanisms. So when we started with the neuroanatomy work, of course, one of the main structures that we were always discussing were Rindenkern, which are barrel-like structures. And so even though the master's thesis was mapping out cerebral cortex in manatees, that of course led to the next question, which was, what are these Rindenkern? Therefore, we know in other mammals like rats, barrels are associated with whiskers. And so I became really interested in whiskers, particularly manatee whiskers, and how they were using them. Because when you first look at a manatee, they don't really have the typical whiskers you see in your dog or cat or even seals. And so we started to look at that in much more detail, and that was really the topic for my dissertation. Basically, starting from the ground up, mapping the distribution of these whiskers, looking at the underlying structure in terms of microstructure, but then the behavioral use of those whiskers. And so that really starts to open up all sorts of other possibilities, and kind of led me down this path of really integrative and comparative biology. That's really where my interests lie, and eventually that led me to looking at whiskers from other animals, looking at brain structure in other animals, brain behavior relationships in other animals. And of course, one of the things that whiskers are used for outside of sensory systems is for feeding. You know, seals are trying to detect where the fish are so they can hunt them down, chase them down, and eat them. And manatees, as you know, are really unique in that they use their whiskers for both. They're sensing objects and food in the environment, but they also use the largest whiskers to feed. And so I guess I came into looking at whiskers from that perspective and quickly became interested in feeding biomechanics in addition to the whisker work. And so my work now has expanded to looking at sea lions, seals. We've done some work with odontocetes. And because of the organizations I got involved with, particularly the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology, I was exposed quite a bit to comparative feeding biomechanics, particularly of fishes. And that's where a lot of the cutting edge work is being done, and that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from.
I see. Now, you mentioned the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology, which is known by the nickname of SICB, and they have a great meeting every year. Maybe for those in the audience that haven't heard of that organization or don't know what the meeting is about, maybe you could give us a feeling for what it's like to go to one of these meetings. I think they're in January every year. And the kind of other scientists that go there, the kind of ideas you get, the things that you might encounter that are unexpected. Give us a feeling for what it's like.
Well, the meeting's different than other kind of conferences because it's primarily a symposium meeting, which means they'll discuss major topics. You know, for instance, one of the highlights of the last few years was a symposium on the origin of flight, and so that's a topic where there's multiple theories that are competing with each other, and it's really interesting, particularly for a young person coming into science, because you get to really see science in action. You get to see people presenting their data, trying to support their hypotheses. You have other people trying to support their hypotheses, and compete with these alternative hypotheses. And you can see how, you know, ideas break down, and other ideas move forward, and more data are accumulated to support these ideas. And you can see that progression of hypotheses. You know, there's this famous quote about how we stand on the shoulders of those that come before us. And you can actually see that in action, I think, at this meeting. The meeting's very interesting because there's many divisions and it's very diverse. So I started off in the division of vertebrate morphology, and more recently they created a new division of comparative biomechanics, and that's really the home of comparative biomechanics as a field now. But there's also the neural field, and there's the ecological fields and invertebrate biology. And for a young person coming into science, it's a great first meeting to go to because you can really explore a lot of different fields and ideas and meet a lot of different people in one place.
So this brings up, you know, kind of my next question. We all are operating in a work environment, but particularly in the field of marine mammalogy, where you've got a lot of species that are threatened or endangered, you know, you have a sort of ethical value system that comes to bear at the same time. Can you kind of give the audience a feeling for how your personal values, your feelings about issues related to marine mammals intersects with your scientific interests, how that plays out for you?
Sure. So sometimes that can be kind of a difficult question, but it comes back to my personal values, I think, where I really want to make a difference in the field, make a contribution, and overall, I think that the science eventually has to make contributions to conservation biology. But having said that, I'm a big believer that basic science is a really important field, and you really need to understand the natural history of these animals in order to make correct management decisions and create management policies for the conservation. And the fact of the matter is, we really know very little about the natural history of most marine mammal species. There's a few kind of model species within the marine mammal field that we know quite a bit about, like bottlenose dolphins and harbor seals. But I think for the vast majority of all the other species, we're still at a very early stage in understanding really the biology of these animals.
Okay. So you progressed through your career. You did a postdoctoral stint, and then you ended up here, what, 10 years ago or so?
Yeah, 10, 11 years ago.
Okay. So you've been a faculty member for 10 years. Can you give the audience a feeling for what that's like on a day-to-day basis? What sort of things do you have to juggle in order to preserve some percentage of your time to actually do science?
It's a real time management puzzle for me because, as all faculty members, we really are evaluated on research, on teaching, and service. And so the percentage of those really vary from place to place. I've been lucky here that we have a moderate teaching load, so that allows me to put quite a bit of time toward research. But the services component can be quite large sometimes too. So, not only are you teaching, but you're advising undergrad students on the curriculum every semester. And of course, you have to bring graduate students in and you're advising them. So you really have to be kind of strict about preserving that time for yourself so that you're able to write proposals to get the research done and then analyze the data that you get once the proposals are funded and then of course write it up for publication. And that's a really important thing. It's not real until it's published, right? And so follow through is really important.
Okay.
And so those are the kind of time management issues I deal with on a day-to-day basis. In terms of the research, I'll spend quite a bit of time in the office in front of the computer writing, of course, but there's quite a bit of time I spend down in the lab. I really do enjoy still getting my hands dirty and doing the lab work, doing the analysis work, and part of our work also involves going out to different aquariums and also going out in the field to take footage of animals doing different behaviors that we analyze as well. So actually I really enjoy the diversity of that, having time in the office writing, doing lab work, but also field work as well.
Now I know that you're a person that has a lot of undergraduates doing research in the lab.
Yeah, that's really important to me.
Can you give a feeling for those out there that might be in college or high school and looking at, hey, how can I get involved in this kind of research as an undergraduate?
Well, I think the most important thing is talk to your professors. A lot of undergrads are a little intimidated by the professors, but we're real people, maybe just a little busier than some folks. And tell them, express your interest, and be persistent. Don't, if someone doesn't have time for you or time to bring you into the lab, ask again at a later time or ask another professor. And I think if you're really interested in getting into science, it's at this point, these days, it's a requirement to have some undergrad research experience. And that's one thing we do a really nice job of here. We actually have some undergrad fellowships and things of that sort. And so it's really nice to be able to bring students into the lab and give them some sort of experience that way.
So you've got a perspective now that goes back, 20 plus years since you were a student and trying to solve these problems for yourself. Maybe you could kind of tell the audience what other things a student might do in the way of volunteering to expand their, network, let's say, of contacts and experiences. And also, maybe you can give us a feeling for how things might be different now than when you were coming up.
Well, I think things are really different now in that the job market for going into academia is just much more competitive. And so, like I said before, I think these days it's a real requirement for undergrad students to get that kind of research experience during that time frame. Otherwise, I think there's so many other students doing that, you'll get overlooked if you don't have that kind of experience. You can't expect to go into like a master's program with really no experience anymore. So I would encourage students to really try to do anything. It doesn't really matter what it is. Just get into a lab somewhere. Or if you don't know what your interest is at the moment, go do something. Go do an internship. Go out and meet people and talk to different people in the field. I think, as long as you're moving from point A to point B, even if point B isn't where you want to end up, knowing that that's not where you want to end up can be just as important. And you might find where you want to go somewhere along the way.
And that point is really interesting and important one about meeting people, because, for example, in the manatee community, it's a fairly small group of people, and by getting in the mix, in the social sense, you start finding out who's who and who's doing what, and it's really a pretty direct way to do that.
And that's what I ended up doing, really without consciously thinking about it. But when I was a master's student looking for a thesis topic, I started doing that. And, really within a week, I had contacted probably the 10, 10 of the most prominent people doing work in Florida at the time. And I started making the connection of who knows who and who's doing what. And kind of putting yourself out there and talking to people. And there were some people who didn't really have time to talk to a master level student at the time, but other people did. And it really starts to open up different opportunities for you.
So, Chris, I wonder if you could, if we go another layer a little deeper, and if you could talk about some of the, rewards and challenges that every endeavor has its unanticipated difficulties and challenges, and we all have those days when we wish we didn't have to wake up and go to work and face those challenges. But I wonder if you could think of what are the rewards of what you've been doing, including things you didn't know were going to be rewards, and what are the difficulties, including things you didn't know were going to be so difficult.
Well, I feel pretty fortunate to be in a position I am. I love being in academia and a professor, and it really is a joy to get up every day and come into work, and not a lot of people can say that. And that's one of the things that's always been important to me, is to find something that's personally fulfilling. I think it's just amazing that in addition to teaching, one of the things I'm being paid to do is to sit here and think of ideas and then find ways to make that a reality. And then actually see those ideas being manifested in terms of the actual project and collecting the data. And then have a final product at the end, a manuscript that you can show from that initial spark in your head. And so that whole process to me is just incredibly rewarding, and it's not something that I really thought that would be, that's something I really anticipated. So that's a really fun aspect of this. Also, just interacting with young people and meeting a diversity of students, particularly having students in my lab at the undergrad level, but also at the graduate level. I really enjoy working with students and helping them solve their problems, because as you know, nothing's straightforward in science, and really one of the skills I think graduate students really learn during their time in school is problem solving.
Right.
That's the real thing. If you run into an obstacle, you can't just stop and give up. You have to find ways around it, and I kind of enjoy doing that and helping other students get through that. An unexpected positive part of this job, what I really enjoy is traveling. So going to different places, working with different peoples of different cultures, and learning how they live their lives in addition to how they do science, and working with different kinds of animals has been really rewarding for me.
Tell the audience some of the places you've been in the recent years.
Well, as you know, I started this off very early in my career because we had an opportunity for me to go study dugongs in Japan in captivity. And so I ended up going over there for a month at first, and was invited back the following year to do some more work. And just several years ago, I was back for another 6-week stint over there to do some work with sea turtles, so a little different project. But I've also done some work with sea turtles in Baja, California. Of course, we're doing work with sea turtles in Qatar right now. But the manatee work led me to look at other animals with really cool whiskers like bearded seals. And so I've been able to do some work with some very good Norwegian collaborators and go to the North Pole up in Svalbard and do some work in the field with those animals, as well as work with bearded seals in captivity, LG.
Now I know you're familiar with techniques ranging from neuroanatomy to motion analysis of biomechanical aspects of movement, electromyography, skull biomechanics, all kinds of things, and then the feeding, the focus on the feeding behavior, suction feeding versus biting feeding, all these things. And when we say comparative, we use that as a shorthand phrase to mean sort of the grand evolutionary diversity picture among the group of animals we're discussing, which usually is mammals in your case, but also involves sea turtles.
Mm-hmm.
So the big picture, one of the ways to interpret that phrase is to say, you know, the many ways animals have gone about solving the problem of making a living, you know, basically feeding, reproduction, those kinds of things. And so I guess what I'm gathering from hearing you talk is that it's really increased your appreciation for the beautiful simplicity and sometimes the complexity of how those problems have been solved. Is that
Yeah.
a fair statement?
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things that's benefited me is to not focus so much on a marine mammal species. I mean, I guess as I have evolved as a scientist, what I've discovered is that, you know, go find your answers in many other kinds of animals to answer your primary questions. For instance, for my postdoctoral training, I actually left the marine mammal world for quite a few years and went and worked with Sue Herring at the University of Washington, who has done a lot of work on the biomechanics of feeding in mammals using miniature pigs really as an animal model, and all of that kind of work is funded through NIH. So that was a real departure for me, but I learned a lot. I learned how to do EMG and a lot of other interesting electrophysiological techniques, and particularly became much more focused on biomechanics. And then I was able to bring a lot of those tools back to the marine mammal world, and I think that's really benefited me. And of course, hopefully it enriches the field and the types of perspectives that I can bring back to the field.
Well, I think that's a really good point, is that one of the ways to contribute to marine mammal biology is to go and find a new technique that hasn't been used that much in marine mammal biology, or maybe not at all, and you open up a whole new world for the people that are focused on marine mammals.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the take-home message there is forge your own path. You know, don't try to follow the path of other people. If you have unique questions, figure out a way to answer those questions, even if it means, you know, leaving the field for a while and going elsewhere. On a broader picture, I would like to see greater participation and greater involvement of scientists in the public arena. And I know this is something that NSF has really been promoting, but, you know, as we talked about before, we're all so busy that we kind of get a bit myopic in our own world, but we have to realize that the public really doesn't understand a lot of what we do, and we have to train ourselves much better at interacting with the public, really getting to understand the value of science, why we're doing what we're doing, and why it's important. And I think, you know, in the last 5 to 10 years, the value of science from the layperson's perspective has been eroded, and that's really disturbing to me. And so I think that it's important for people in the field and for young people coming into the field to definitely participate in political processes and get a little more involved in promoting science and trying to educate people who aren't scientists what it is we do and the value of what we do.